This past Tuesday was the opening of the long-awaited independent 9/11 inquiry. INN was there and later had a very special guest in our studio.
Questions fall into three basic categories. First, they wanted to know what led to terrorist attacks upon our country September 11th, affect the lives of almost 3,000 Americans, and forever changed the lives of millions of others. There was not a person alive that day whose life was not changed in some way by September 11th.
Now, as we watch the nightly news and now see the war against terror being fought in the Middle East, a lot of people say that, well, perhaps almost 2 weeks ago, the first shots of that war were fired. In my view, the first shots of that war were fired September 11th, 2001, right here in New York City.
Was it luck? Is it luck that aberrant stock trades were not monitored? Is it luck when 15 visas are awarded based on incomplete forms? Is it luck when airline security screeners allow hijackers to board planes with box cutters and pepper spray? Is it luck when emergency FAA and NORAD protocols are not followed? Is it luck when a national emergency is not reported to top government officials on a timely basis? To me, luck is something that happens once. When you have this repeated pattern of broken protocols, broken laws, broken communication, one cannot still call it luck. If at some point we don't look to hold the individuals accountable for not doing their jobs properly, then how can we ever expect for terrorists to not get lucky again?
In the intervening time since the September 11 attacks, we have learned a great deal about what happened on that day and the events leading up to it. In particular, we are grateful for the work of the joint inquiry conducted by the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. Congress has specifically instructed us to build upon the good work of the joint inquiry as we proceed with our investigation and develop recommendations for Congress and the President. Yet the joint inquiry's full report had only just last week been made available to the members of this commission who have their full security clearances. As of last week, most of the commissioners and most of the staff had not yet received security clearances. I believe the scheduling of this hearing has had a salutary effect on speeding up the clearance process. And I am gratified that the White House has now promised the funds necessary to carry out our work. It is important that President Bush has publicly supported this commission and its goals. The full cooperation of the relevant departments and agencies of the executive branch is essential to the Commission's ability to carry out its responsibilities. And the result of such cooperation will be a measure of our success.
Here in the studio today, we have Mr. Richard Ben-Veniste. He served with distinction at the Watergate Special Prosecutor's Office from 1973 to 1975. He's also served as a federal prosecutor in New York. He was the boss of young Rudolph Giuliani. And today he is a major Washington attorney with Mayor Brown, Rowe, and Ma in D.C. Welcome, Mr. Ben-Veniste.
Thank you for inviting.
Well, it's really quite an honor to have an actual member of the National Commission here on INN Report. We've been following with interest the development of the National Commission. My first question, I wanted to talk to you about how you view what seems to be a somewhat antagonistic relationship between the White House and people who question 9/11. I'm speaking specifically about the controversy about funding. You mentioned in your introductory remarks about the lack of security clearances for the commission. And let's go back a couple of months ago. You remember that there was some talk in the media about how Tom Daschle had been called by Bush and Cheney and somewhat threatened on the phone about not letting the joint inquiry on Congress look in too closely about 9/11. What are your thoughts?
Well, our statute provides us with authority to conduct a very broad inquiry, basically to provide an investigation of 9/11 that's thorough, complete, and will withstand the scrutiny of history. And I feel confident that we have the kind of people on our commission and our staff who are capable of doing that. Now, I have no comment on what you mentioned earlier about the controversy. It's clear that the joint inquiry, which did an astonishingly good job in the time they had, was not afforded all of the information they sought. Our mandate expects that we will build on the joint inquiry's investigation, and we will not be reinventing the wheel, but we will go to places which the joint inquiry was not permitted to explore. So that's one of the basic tenets of what we're doing.
What are those areas that the joint inquiry on Congress was not allowed to explore?
Well, they made certain requests for interviews of members of the White House and the National Security Council, and they didn't get all the information that they sought.
I don't know if you're able to comment, but there's been a lot of talk about, not in mainstream media, but in independent media, about the relationship between the Bush family and the Saudis. Let's say George Herbert Walker Bush's membership on the board of directors of the Carlyle Group, or the fact that in 1978, young W. Bush received money through James Bath, who it turned out was working for the Saudis, namely Salim bin Laden. Are you familiar with this information? And
I don't have any comment on that.
America has such a bad history with these kinds of special investigations. We have these major historical events that are then investigated. Former Governor Kane yesterday made reference to two precedents: the Warren Commission report on the assassination of JFK and the Roberts Commission report on the Pearl Harbor attack. And he admitted that the results of both those commissions were inadequate and did not satisfy the majority of people. So if you prefer not to talk about the specifics of the Bush-bin Laden connection, then let's talk about the specifics of a broader historical inquiry. I mean, how can the National Commission on 9/11 be different from the Warren report?
I think the better analogy is to the Roberts Commission, which was created almost immediately after the attack at Pearl Harbor.
Right.
And the shortcomings of that commission's report were documented. There were several subsequent inquiries, and it turned out that the Roberts Commission did not fully utilize the information available, and that it came to conclusions which were, I think, quite short-sighted, and indeed, in some cases, scapegoated individuals.
We had a panel, we saw a panel come before the commission of 5 people who had firsthand injury experience in 9/11, and they told stories that were traumatic and emotional, but they emphasized that they had no anger. We're not going to point fingers. But then we had victims' family members in the next panel, and these people were, I felt like, had a whole different level of knowledge and inquiry, and were asking some very hard questions about the lack of aviation response from the military on 9/11. And you know, there are people out there that are asking hard questions, and I thought that was somewhat represented on Monday by the lunchtime press conference with 9/11 Citizens Watch. I wanted to ask you if you had reviewed any of the materials on them, or have you seen any?
I was eating lunch at lunchtime, and we had, I think, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
The family members represent a broad spectrum of personal reaction to the horrific losses that they have suffered. And they have been a constant source to us, not only of motivation, but they have provided very useful insights and information. And we are honored to work with them and to keep a very close relationship with the family members.
What are some of the questions that the family members are asking that you feel are valid?
They're asking a number of questions about how it happened, that things which we had in place.
Just try to, like, off the top of your head, what were some emotional, like, you know, knowledgeable, rational reactions that you had? You're like, wow, that's a good question. That really bugs me too.
Well, the forms that were filled out by the hijackers to get into this country
Right, the
were
INS
obviously inadequate. Those are actually State Department forms for visas, which provided inadequate information. The real issues that I think were highlighted in the hearings by the family members who had many questions, which we will address. Hopefully we will provide answers, at least by statements from those who were responsible at the time, for why our country could not connect the dots, did not operate as our system was designed to operate. And that will inform the suggestions that we make for making our system
Back
better.
for a second and talk about what you just said about the INS forms of the terrorist hijackers and how there just seems to be a disconnect between how could these people, you know, it was pointed out that a couple of these people were on the CIA's list of terrorists. They had attended a terrorism conference, and yet they were allowed to be in the country. There's a gentleman you may know of named Daniel Hopsicker. He's a producer, former producer on NBC, and he wrote a book called Barry and the Boys. You're mentioned in it. It's about a former client of yours who's now deceased, Mr. Barry Seal. Are you familiar with this book?
No, I haven't read the book, but I did represent Barry Seal, who was convicted. He thereafter, on his own, became a government informant. He worked against the Sandinistas, and that certainly is not the subject of this interview.
It's not the subject of the
We
interview,
have
but
quite a bit to do here on our
we do.
commission without going into all of my private practice. I certainly wouldn't want this to be an infomercial for Richard Ben-Veniste as a private attorney.
Not at all. But the question was, Daniel Hopsicker is...
So if you wouldn't mind staying on our subject,
not at all.
I'd appreciate it.
He did this interesting research on the web that you can get about the flight school in Florida, about the connections between CIA and Rudy Decker, the Dutch national who ran that flight school. I'm wondering if the commission plans to investigate that.
I think you're going right for the capillary.
You mean the jugular?
I may say so. No, I mean the capillary.
You mean the fine detail?
I mean the things that are the detail that is certainly not central to us getting started here. So we are in the inception stages. We are getting started. Our inquiry is on its way.
These are part of the questions that the family are asking, Citizens Watch.
I don't think anybody asked any questions about Mr. Hopsicker, whoever he may be.
No,
earlier.
the question is really about Rudy Decker and about he's a Dutch national. Mohamed Atta was at his flight school doing cocaine with his girlfriend. If Mohamed Atta is technically a fundamentalist Muslim, what is he doing cocaine and going to strip bars with Rudy Decker's girlfriend?
You know, that's a heck of a question.
I know, it sure is, right? Well, then we agree on that. Maybe then we'll just sort of wrap it up at this point, if you'd rather. If I know that you have a flight to catch.
Right.
And I appreciate you being on the program.
Sure thing.
And thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, INN Report reporting.